Hi, I'm your host Satwan, and welcome to this episode with Tim Brown from Prove. If you'd prefer to listen to the audio version of this podcast, simply visit thepayments.show in your web browser and you'll get a list of all the episodes along with links to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast directories. If you would like a PDF transcript of this episode, please visit thepaymentsshow.substack.com where you can download it. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Tim, welcome to the Payment Show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Where are you joining from today?
Tampa Bay, Florida, right around the west coast of Florida, close to Clearwater.
Oh, beautiful. Is that where Prove is headquartered, by the way?
Actually, no. Our headquarters is in Manhattan, in New York City. So We've got a lovely office that looks out over the Empire State Building.
Great stuff. Well, I'm going to get straight into it and give you an introduction.
Sure.
So, Tim, you're the Global Identity Officer at Prove. And I think if there was any job title that's very important in the world right now, I think that would pretty much be well up there. So I'm sure you've got some great information to give around what you do in your day-to-day. And to explain Prove at a high level for the audience, you describe yourselves as the world's most accurate identity verification and authentication platform, or in other words, the identity layer of the internet. And Prove solutions are used by more than 1,000 businesses across many different industries, including e-commerce and P2P marketplaces, which are particularly of interest to me, but also cryptocurrency, financial services, healthcare, and gaming. So you really operate across multiple sectors. And I really wanted to give the audience a sense of some of the achievements that you've got with your solution. So you help businesses to onboard consumers up to 80% faster with your pre-fill solution, 75% less onboarding fraud, 35% less onboarding abandonment. So cart abandonment is a huge problem, as we all know, for retailers. So there's some great stats there, and really wanted to hand it over to you to understand if I got that right at a high level, and if you wanted to add any more context as well.
Sure. I guess we can start with a little bit about me. If you want to start there, that's fine. It's an unusual title. I get, sort of that side-headed cocked look from like dogs when we hear a weird whistle, and when people will say, "What's a global identity officer?" I mean, we have chief identity officers, but I think it's a fancy way of saying that I focus on not just our identity and authentication platform that I lead in our organization from a product perspective, but also I focus on where the trends in the market are going. Horizon 2, Horizon 3 things like where's the puck moving to. I've been in the industry since really biometrics and identity since the mid '90s, and so I've seen a lot of trends come and go. And I've been involved in a lot of different large-scale identity projects, and it sort of gives me a unique lens to be able to look out at the world and say, okay, where is the industry trending? I mean, some of them are quite obvious, things like decentralization that we're seeing in Europe and places like that, but others maybe not so obvious, like not so obvious on how to address them. Things like AI and it's the fraud attacks that seem to be escalating these days. I think those are, looking forward to figure out what's going to be the best mode of approaching those problems and trying to resolve them. But that's me in a nutshell. It's been an interesting career so far.
You mentioned you've been in the space for quite a long time, and for many average folks, and I include myself in this, biometrics only became a thing since everybody had Touch ID on their iPhones, and until that technology became available. I think prior to that, biometrics were really only seen in movies when people were trying to get into CIA buildings. So how long did you say you've been in the space?
Since 1995. I was leading software development organization for a company that was commercializing fingerprint technology. We were our first product to market for fingerprint from a consumer perspective was logging on to Windows NT 4.0. So give you an idea of how old that is. But we had built a very low cost fingerprint reader that plugged into the back of your PC, and we were enabling a lot of enterprise use cases to use that. So it's come a long way. Absolutely, it's been an interesting ride. But yeah, it's funny. For the longest time, my family, my kids would always be like, "Well, what do you do?" And I try to explain it, and then I would inevitably hear, well, dad works for the government and, doing fingerprint recognition. That's what he does. But largely I've been focused on commercial implementations and then in the mid 2000s, also things like forensic systems and things that you would expect biometrics to have been applied to at that time, because we sort of had a bit of a lull, cost associated and adoption of fingerprint technology in consumers wasn't quite there yet until the iPhone rolled along. So I focused my focus turned towards more typical forensic style biometric systems. And then we moved. The company I worked for actually was largely responsible for bringing forward sort of the mobile driver's license frameworks. We were doing a lot of driver's license work, which was basically my pivot into more of an identity type of platform where we're bringing digital identity, remote ID verification, things like that, and applying biometrics to it as well.
Sure.
It's been interesting. And then I joined Prove a couple of years ago. I guess it's been 2.5 years now of sort of being heavily focused on the commercial side. As you said, it's such a wonderful company. We do quite a bit of business with a lot of household names in the industry. I think we enable commerce. We protect at least here in the U.S. for sure. You're most likely interacting with a bank that uses our technology behind the scenes to enable authentication, to enable the initial identity bind that we do. So we've got a laundry list of NASCAR logos, if you will, of companies that we've all heard of and that use us successfully on a day-to-day basis at scale.
Yep. Well, we're definitely going to talk about those a bit later. I did want to talk about the solutions that you offer, because again, I think most people listening, like myself, when they read your website, identity, you'd think, okay, there's selfie verifications, where I am, location, IP address, and those sort of basic key points is what anyone in the IT sort of space would think about immediately, I'd imagine, like myself. But you've got quite a rich set of offerings. Digital onboarding, you've got API marketplaces, passwordless solutions for end users. So there's a lot there. And sure. I personally would love to touch on the pre-fill for businesses, because if somebody's listening and they're running an e-commerce store and they're selling online, how you help those businesses. And then we'll definitely move on to the financial services side of things as well, because that's obviously huge for you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've built up quite a stable of products over the years. I mean, Improve's been in business for about 13 or 14 years now, and we've built a lot of our tech is built on top of phone intelligence. What can we derive from a key that's ubiquitous as your phone about you, which is unusual when you think about the market segment. I think you rightfully point out that most people, when they think about remote identity verification, they immediately jump to document scanning, selfie match, trying to read your passport chip, those types of things as a way of identifying a person. As you know, I think anybody that's actually used those realizes that a few truths. One, it presents a ton of user friction, makes it very difficult. I mean, it's not an enjoyable experience for the end user, results in a lot of dropouts and onboarding flows. It presents a lot of sandpaper in the flow, if you will. And, and more recently, there's been a lot of questions around bias and things of that nature, and biometrics and matching faces to documents, and just biometrics in general. It's sort of clouded with a concern. So what's interesting about Prove and our way that we onboard identity and we establish identity is that we've seen so many data signals here in the U.S. across the years that we've been operating that we've effectively built up a method that allows us to tell that it is Tim indeed interacting on Tim's device as he's onboarding into a bank or pre-filling into a credit card application or something like that. Our ability to do it is very, very low friction, low touch. The user experience is typically quite delightful, which sounds interesting to say about a user experience, but it is, we generally get high marks for the user experience because it lacks that friction. It lacks that typical kind of, I've got to go, first of all, I've got to go fetch my wallet, pull my driver's license out. I got to capture it. You know what? I'm capturing it in my kitchen. The overhead lighting is really bad, so it's reflecting poorly on my document. Okay, let me hide it underneath of my countertop. Try to block some of the light. Now I've got to figure out how to tilt my camera to get it in there, and then okay, now let me catch my face, and that all of that produces this level of friction. And our approach really is, how can I tell that Tim is in possession of his phone? Can I do that as silently as possible with as little interaction with the end user? We can do that by talking to the networks, to the cell phone towers, to identify what phone number that is. Then once we have that, we have a rich history of signals and live data that we're getting on a daily basis that says what's the reputation of that device. Has there been a SIM change recently? Has there been any disconnects or any other activity that we think may be worrisome? We pull together a bunch of signals, and with those things in hand, now I have a phone number that I strongly trust at that point, right? I say, okay, it's in possession. It's not some phone that's pretending to be Tim's phone number. It's actually this number that we're seeing, and we're quite sure that there hasn't been any risk signals associated with it, like a SIM change in the last hour or something. Once we've done that, then we go out and look at a bunch of data sources to say that this is Tim's phone number, that we expect this to be Tim. And then our pre-fill product actually returns that identity data. So basically, it's a strongly bound identity verification that's occurred without having to do a document verification or a selfie match. And the really neat thing about it is the performance that we see out of it. We have a great customer success story on our website from Synchrony Bank. They use us for doing credit onboarding into their credit cards, all their branded credit cards, and their success rates are in the low to mid 90s with very, very low fraud. I think like 3 to 5 basis points of fraud, which is pretty substantial when you think about the competitors in the market segment. They're out there pushing document verification that you either crank the dial so you have very low friction for an end user, it's a quick capture, but then that introduces the potential for a lot more fraud because the checks that they're putting on the document to try to catch that it's authentic get dialed down. And then if you go the opposite direction and say we want to address fraud and we want to make it very stringent, well, that results in a miserable user experience because they've got to capture multiple times, probably gets routed out to human review. And so it doesn't work well for anybody.
And then it gets expensive.
It does get very expensive. I mean, that's the nice thing too, is that we, from a cost competitive perspective, we are at the end of the day, it's not just about the cost associated with just that one act. It's also the downstream effects, like you're saying, with human review or something like that. And the interesting bit too is that our technology tends to, and you cited some of the statistics, the improvements in onboarding. If you think about a credit card company, that results in revenue, positive, whole lot of revenue for companies that come along and implement us, because if you're increasing onboarding success, you get 35, 40, 50% more people onboarding. That's real revenue, especially for your listeners. Not just nice from an end user perspective. It doesn't just reduce fraud, but it also makes money because it increases the onboarding flows for people.
And that's so key. I mean, I can only speak from a personal perspective. The first time I used a selfie scan system, it was on FIDO, and the experience was really good. The second time I used it, maybe a year later for another financial product I was setting up, was just hell on earth. Just didn't work, no matter how I took my picture, put my face in the egg-shaped thing. It just drove me mad. And then the third time it was kind of okay again. So not to crap on them. I'm just giving an example of my personal experience. And then one of those institutions I actually tried to help a family member set that up, and it was a nightmare for them as well. So it was very hit and miss, and it was very frustrating.
You're right, and like you said, it's not to single out any vendors. It's just challenging. I mean, some of it we've gotten better. I mean, it's really interesting. I think you touched on biometrics and the consumer's acceptance and adoption of biometrics over the years. And I think that's really helped to start to train people on how to do these things. But then there's just some things that are just environmental issues that occur that make it very difficult. Or, as you say, different approaches to doing liveness detection introduce certain levels of friction involved. And that's probably what you were seeing, was that not that you're deep fake or something, but it was probably the liveness detection that was causing that level of friction. It's easy to push the camera button and take a selfie. It's hard to do liveness detection, and then it's all based on risk. Do you have low risk settings in your liveness detection? Do you have high risk settings? Those kinds of things. So I think it doesn't surprise me that you've experienced those things. challenges.
Didn't realize you can tweak that dial, how liveness
Well,
you are.
yeah, I think most of the vendors will offer sort of they'll do everything. They'll do passive and active liveness detection. They have, passive will be essentially just stand there and tap the button, and they try to do an analysis on the image, looking for flashes on the face or depth and things of that nature. And then active liveness is the kind of thing like, oh, turn your head, look up, look that way. So it all kind of depends. And then some of them introduce flashing lights to try to, different color strobes, things like that, to try to approach, telling whether it's actually a face in front of it to tell if it's different. And it's, and they all work to a varying degree of successes. Like you said, I mean, FIDO's approach was good for you once, and then some of the other vendors that are out there, maybe not so much. We look at that and say, we believe there's a better way.
Yeah, excellent. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the retail and e-commerce side. I'm assuming you have retail and marketplace customers, and I wanted to ask how typically you've been involved in that side of things, in the sense that are retail organizations using your solution directly or maybe indirectly? So if they're selling something through, say, installment payments or credit or something, that your solution is used indirectly in retail.
Sure. I think, I think about retail, so first of all, I think one good example of that, we have a wonderful relationship with Visa that we announced last year, and we were bringing our pre-fill product to their merchants to be able to enable faster onboarding or faster checkout experiences. So we've put a lot of effort and focus on how we, I mentioned that we drive a lot of our key or our authentication or our identification flows from your mobile phone. We've also put a lot of emphasis on how we can do that from email. It's typical of a guest checkout experience, trying to figure out, how we can improve the flow to make it as seamless as possible for individuals as they're onboarding. So we've been driving pre-fill there. I think we've been penetrating into that market quite a bit. We're starting to see some people starting to really take an evaluation into approach and how we can enable collecting that data for retailers without having the user input it in, and then expanding that outwards to look at, you mentioned like buy now, pay later loans, things like that. How can we not only can we help enable our customers to be able to surface that kind of information, but also can we do things like help them make that information portable? We've been talking about one of the interesting aspects of what we can do with our platform is how do we start to expose. So I'll give you an example, maybe the best way to kind of explain what I'm talking about. Like if I finance recently I just did a bunch of home renovations. Part of that was buying a new air conditioning unit. I get 0% financing for 12 months. So I jumped at that and said, great, I get this financing. I paid it off early, but I'm still sitting with this financing, this credit that's available. Now, I potentially am in the market for a mattress, for instance. So I show up at a mattress firm and I go to buy a mattress online. Now, wouldn't it be great if we were able to surface that information as part of that user journey? Now that I have this, I know that I've had this line of credit with vendor A, and they also provide lines of credit for the mattress firm. Why can't we surface that data to show as part of that experience? So not only is it about onboarding, but it's also about how can I start to make some of those things portable, so I can walk that line of credit across to another vendor and then use it and let the consumer know. That's it. And getting back to the value that we provide to our relying parties or customers that are integrating our tech into the merchant flows. It's like, how can I drive more customer usage of that credit line by exposing that when they end up at this other vendor or this other website that's selling, that they want to be able to leverage that stuff. So our platform allows for that to be portable, allows for those types of attributes, which is unusual for an identity verification company. We talk a lot about identity verification as being a means to reduce fraud, but I also see it from a sort of a forward-looking perspective. Is that really what's going to win the day in the identity space? Is going to be, how do I take that identity and then bind it to something that allows me to have these user experiences across the web to enable payments, to enable purchasing, to enable better user experiences, targeted user experiences in app, things like that. That to me is where the money in identity is really going, as opposed to just, oh, I need to onboard, I need to prove who I am to get into a state website or something like that. That's interesting, but I think that's really being commoditized, and the cool things that are happening are going to be around payments and marketplaces and in commerce.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, you know what you just said there. Prior to, say, a solution like yours, you'd have to get the identity piece, and then you're going to try and piece together what Prove is offering with,
Right.
5 other solutions, right? You've got the, I don't know, consumer data SaaS solution that you've got, or this data set or that data set, and you're just fusing it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned early in the podcast this notion of the identity layer of the internet, and having been in this industry for a long time, I've heard that plenty of times throughout the years. I think more so than just the identity layer of the internet, because I think that's largely challenging for most people. I think it's how those identities can enable those global experiences across the internet is really what I see the value and the power that Proof brings to the table. We can definitively tie you to your device and to your key, we refer to it as a key. So I can look at this as a key and say, now I've bound you to this phone device, and I can when I go and see that, I know it's Tim using it, and I can enable some very interesting use cases, like can enable, web wallets and, credit card experiences, and, all these different types of things can be pulled together based on the fact that we know it's Tim tied to that identity, and we have an authenticator that's bound to it, a passwordless experience that's driven by local biometrics on device. So that in turn enables a bunch of, the sky's the limit as to the things that you can do. From there, you can start to say, oh, wow, I can have this really pleasing user experience when they step in. I can make lines of credit portable. I can enable seamless purchasing. I can start to enable, top of wallet, experiences where, not only are we providing a wallet, but we're also looking at how we can, structure that wallet and provide, first choice ranking for credit cards and certain credit cards that have more points, and, the sky's the limit from a merchant in a commerce perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. A key point that you've hammered home multiple times, and it's my fault for not mentioning it earlier, is the history of your company. So it originally started as Payphone, if my research is correct.
That's right.
It'd be great if you could maybe touch on that very briefly, how Prove ended up going from there to where you are today. What originally drove the Payphone solution, whatever that was, because I don't really know.
Sure. So it's interesting. I'll do my best to recount the founder story of how Payphone came about. There was, certain geographic markets globally that lacked credit cards, but were buying these iPhones early on, with paying for minutes through their mobile operators. Our founder came up with an approach to monetizing those minutes to be able to enable purchases, and thus the name Payphone was born. So you would say, oh, I have 100 minutes left on my plan that's worth a certain amount, X dollars. I can now turn around and monetize that to buy songs on iTunes or apps and to download, because I don't have a credit card. So that was sort of the genesis of what Payphone was early designed to do. We joined up with Early Warning Systems, which is this sort of consortium company for the major tier 1 banks here in the U.S. And we started being a technology provider to Early Warning, and we were in that position for quite some time. Basically Early Warning selling into the banks. We were selling into the banks as well, all the tier 1 banks here in the U.S. Several years ago, the contract with Early Warning ended, and we decided that it made sense for us to take the lessons learned that we had from selling into those banks and building up this rich technology stack to be able to support Early Warning and the work that they're doing, to bring those to a variety of different other verticals and start looking at how we could do things like pre-fill, like do a seamless identity verification flow. You mentioned sort of the sort of the stable of things that we sell. We sell those ingredients to make these things happen, but we also sell solutions that are built with those things that are in a standard, that are wired together in a very standard way that addresses a majority of the use cases that are out in the market. So when we made that switch from Payphone, we became Prove Identity, which for my money is probably one of the best identity names that are out there. It's out there. I tell our CEO all the time, I'm like, this is a great marketing move by calling us Prove. You're proving identity. It rolls off the tongue very well. So we joined Prove, we became Prove, and we started looking at how we then in turn, selling into not just the banks, but also bringing the good word of Prove to other verticals and looking at how we could apply them to things like credit card onboarding or merchant onboarding or online gaming. You pick, we are pretty much in those verticals. How can we enable healthcare onboarding, those types of things? So it's applicable across the board.
Thanks for that explanation. That was really interesting, actually. I want to move on to the convenience of your platform for end users. So one of the parts of your solution is called Prove Auth, which helps people go passwordless. And combined with that, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that one of your job roles, I think it's current role as well, you're part of the FIDO Alliance. So if anyone listening doesn't know what that is, I believe that's a industry set of players that have got together in tech to eliminate passwords. So more of an industry standard approach rather than tech companies doing their own thing. So it'd be great if you could talk about both of those and if they're even interlinked, if the Prove solution was developed because of that.
For sure. Yeah, just briefly, when I was at my previous employer, I was our board representative for FIDO, and then Prove rejoined FIDO, the FIDO Alliance, last year, and so we just became a board member again, and I'm our primary board member. But I'm focused on how, interestingly enough, we talked about the differences in identity verification between doc verification and what we do, what Prove does today, this very frictionless approach. When I was previously on the FIDO board, I was part of the ID working group, which is really focused on how do you bind an identity to a FIDO token or a FIDO key. We were focused on, at that time, heavily focused on doc verification and selfie matching. And that's still ongoing, but Prove's a big part of what Prove's trying to do is help provide like education and input on newer ways to approach that problem. And so we're still engaged in ID working group, and they've got an ID Next effort that's really looking at how these other signals can be used to do identity verification. So that's where we kind of leverage. But for the listeners, FIDO, you're right. So FIDO stands for Fast Identification Online. So it was founded a handful of years ago with a number of different approaches to establishing authentication. FIDO 2 being the most recent, which actually most people will probably be familiar with it as Passkeys, especially if they track the authentication market at all. A couple years ago, the Alliance decided to rebrand what was called FIDO 2, the FIDO 2 standard, into what they call Passkeys through big support with Google, Apple, and Samsung. They were very much interested in making those not just strong authenticator on the device to replace passwords, but making them portable across your own ecosystem of devices. So Passkeys was chosen as the name and really focused on it. Conceptually, the idea behind Passkeys is that rather than me have to remember 100 passwords or store 100 passwords in a password manager, come up with some random collection of digits, I can use cryptographic surety to be able to establish a passkey on the device when I create my account. And that sort of I use here in the U.S. I don't know. We have Wayfair as a good example of Passkeys. That was one of the first implementations. One of the first implementations of Passkeys that I ran across actually was at Wayfair. I happened to be out buying new furniture for a house we were renovating, and I was getting ready to say, hey, do you want to not have a password? And I said, hey, this is neat. I know what this is, right? This is Passkeys. So I set that up, and basically, rather than put in a password, I just click the button and say, create my passkey. It does a local biometric match on the device. So using my Face ID on my iPhone, biometric never leaves the device. You don't have to worry about it being lost or stolen or anything like that. There's a set of keys that are created on the device. The private key sits on the device. The public key leaves and goes back to the server. Now, when I come back to the website, come back to Wayfair in this example, I authenticate. I do a match on my face on device. The private key on my device signs a message basically, and sends that off, and then the signature is validated on the backside. And that turns out to be much stronger than doing passwords because it's not phishable. So nobody can actually ask you to, that message in and of itself isn't useful to a phisher. The real piece of importance is that private key that sits on the device, and that can't be extracted from the device without destroying it. So that's sort of the beauty of it. It's a non-phishable technology that does away with having to remember all these passwords and relies on technology that's on your device. Now, what Prove does, we strongly bind that identity component to the device through a lot of the things I've talked about. Whether you're in possession of it, what the reputation is are you indeed owner of that device? And then we issue a passkey on behalf of the merchant site or for logon or for whatever the use case is going to be. Then next time they show up, you can use that. And the benefit is not just that I've replaced the password, because passwords don't have an inherent identity attached to it. But that I'm using this as an indicator of my identity now. So it's a strongly bound identity to that authenticator. So every time I use it subsequently, we are able to basically assert that identity and push it forward in the space. So it really turns out to be a very strong way to be able to do things like for recurring visitors, or if you've got a brand that potentially has, you're an onboarding brand, or let's say you're a scheduling brand and you work with a number of different customers, then you can do a federated token like this that allows your users to authenticate once or onboard once in that in your experience, and then carry it across and federate it across all your customers' experiences too, which is kind of a neat approach to doing authentication. But
excellent. Well, yeah, I'm seeing more retailers, especially, just in my example, eBay. I've still got my username and password, but it's hammering me every time to, are you sure you really, really, really don't want a passkey? Like they've done the workflow in a certain way that if I accidentally press another button.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's a world where once you get people going in that direction, it becomes quite self-evident that it's the right thing for them to do. You hear too often. The great thing about it is that you can't fish it. To me, as an identity and authentication geek, I think it's the great part about that is that my parents or my friends can't receive an email saying, hey, click this link because this is, Bank of the USA, but it's spelled slightly incorrectly and they don't catch it because it's got some weird character in it. And heaven forbid they click that link and then give away their password. That's the best part about this, is that it goes a long way to addressing rampant fraud in the industry. But it also, I think you can start to see like some really interesting use cases that start to enable powerful interactions with consumers and making their identities portable, their identity and their data portable, so they can start to interact across the internet with security in mind and convenience.
Sure. There's a few things I want to talk about next, but before I do, in terms of your platform and really messaging for any business listening that wants a better solution to convert more, sell more, and more easily at a lower cost, is there a key message or anything you want to get across that I might have missed?
I think if you're looking for ease of onboarding for your consumers and for your businesses, you mentioned you were interested in talking about pre-fill for our small and medium businesses product that we released last year. Whether you're onboarding consumers, you're onboarding principals of a company into B2B commerce, our pre-fill and our identity solutions that we have do it quite easily. And the good news is you're not sacrificing any fraud or you're not worried about fraud, because it's the flows have been proven to show that they have high success rates, low friction, high conversion rates, while doing it with very low fraud rates, which is largely unheard of in the industry. You're normally sacrificing one for the other.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, so as we're heading towards the end, I'd like to talk about some fun stuff. So,
okay.
You said earlier that you're always looking as to where the puck is going. Saying that to me is like showing a red flag to a ball. I love that stuff. So I'm definitely going to ask you if you can talk about where you think things are going in payments and this sort of space in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. Wow. And given also that you said earlier that you've been in this game for a while, many years, be great to hear some crazy stories. If you're dealing with criminals in that world, I would love to hear some crazy stories that you might have, one or two maybe.
Yeah, so that's funny. So let's start from the get go there. Yeah, where the puck is going. I actually I'm keenly interested to see how successful the European Union's move to decentralization is going to be. Right? They've clearly articulated that the member states have to focus on protecting consumer privacy and and improving experiences for certain verticals. So it's largely government mandated that's driving. I think it's, if I remember correctly, healthcare, travel, banking, and government services are the four main verticals that the EU is looking at to be able to say, hey, look, these are perfect and they're ripe for using an identity wallet, using digital credentialing to be able to have for the user experience to be able to do data release and consented data release, and rather than having your data farmed. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that in the U.S. at the state level. We're getting these consumer protectionist laws being passed that are focused on how do in the news has been a lot about age verification, that it's been really kind of closing the grips on how onboarding people into avoiding onboarding minors into adult sites, things like that. Trying to improve the ability to tell how old somebody is behind the phone. I think we're starting to see a world where those types of decentralized credentials may play an important role in that. But I do think that that's going to be interesting to watch, right? I think the wallet wars, if you will, of where identity ends up is going to be quite interesting, whether that ends up in an OEM wallet here in the US or EU wallets and specific state-based EU wallets and globally. I think that's probably not so 6 to 12 months. That's probably 24 to 48 months out as we see some of those regulations occur. But it's definitely an interesting place. It's a move. It's a seismic shift from identity from a centralized perspective to identity from a decentralized and consumer control perspective. And I think that in and of itself is interesting. And we see in the U.S. you're seeing that somewhat in the driver's license, the mobile driver's license space. You're seeing a lot of adoption, putting mobile driver's licenses, and the OEMs are doing their best to help accelerate that with use cases like travel. So that's been kind of interesting. I think given that this is an election here in the U.S., I think another thing that's very interesting to me is the what is going to happen with deepfake technology, AI generated video and audio. I think there have been a number of challenging occurrences recently that have been well documented in the news. There was the Zoom incident that resulted in a $23 million loss to a company. There was somebody onboarded with an AI generated driver's license into a crypto exchange. So I think you're going to start to see more of that, especially in technologies that are really focused on image-based capture. You'll start to see those types of attacks occurring, and that's going to be disruptive. And it's going to be disruptive not just to the onboarding experiences and at the level that we haven't seen before, but it's also going to be disruptive in our normal lives just from what the news we consume. And related to that, it's interesting. There are some initiatives in the creative space. My wife is a creative, and she's a graphic designer, artist. So she's always looking at how to attribute her identity to the creative stuff, the creative things that she makes and pushes out into the world. There's an effort in being led by Adobe and companies like that are trying to add sort of identity provenance to data or to imagery and videos and that type of thing. That'll hopefully go a long way to helping us combat some of these suspicious videos that are being pushed out onto X or onto Facebook or into the news. That hopefully there are identity attestations onto who actually created it. Whether was it video created by Sora, right? Things like that. It's like those types of attestations will start to carry along in the video, and I think that's going to be. That actually, I think we'll see a lot of movement on in the next 12 months. I think there's going to be, especially given the importance of the election here in the U.S. and the troubling trends in fraud and creating bogus data that's leaking out into the web.
Yeah, one example of what you even said about the sort of standardized wallet. I used to live in Australia, and they've got MyGov over there, and they created that I mean, obviously the scope of a project like that's quite big, but one of the areas of that from memory was you shouldn't have to provide the same things again and again if you're opening a bank account or this or that.
Right.
That private businesses or banks should be able to tap into that data set, which has been done already, rather than everyone have their own in FIDO or this or that, So, yeah, I mean, it did make a lot of things more convenient as I was using it after they introduced it, and it was quite good. But yeah, it's all about how the law and privacy and all that interact in different countries, isn't it?
It is, and I think you hit on something. I think there's also a movement to, and you're seeing a reaction to this in the U.S. on a lot of these age-based verification attempts, or the laws that are trying to force age-based verification. You're seeing industries pull out of certain states, and a big reason why is people don't necessarily want to share their PII. Getting back to doc verification. We live in a world where breaches happen, and it's like if I'm sending an image of my driver's license off to a company that's going to process it, are they keeping it? How long are they keeping it? What security is in place to be able to handle that? Is the data encrypted? There's all these questions that pop up and that we all should be asking. So really kind of that move towards a credential that allows for it to, you to be able to assert that. You hear a lot about zero knowledge proofs in the crypto space. Similar, like how can I assert my age, my state of residence, my country of residence? How can I do those things without having to release any PII to you, and you can trust it? I mean, I think that model is going to be, that's sort of implicit in what the EU is trying to drive to, and I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that in the US as well, and those types of interactions. Certainly. Now, that's one of the big things that we're trying to do at Prove, is to make that identity as portable as possible, to be able to handle those types of things for you, those use cases as you travel as a consumer across the internet. So,
just popped into my head a line from the Team America movie: "Freedom costs $1.05."
That's right. So. You asked, the other part of your question there was interesting stories. We've got it there. Yeah, it was interesting. Some of the forensic software that we created was used by the U.S. for bringing back a lot of the forensic material from Afghanistan and Iraq, and it was very interesting to see those the use of our tool. See those tools being used in like very high risk scenarios where that there's it's a life or death situation on the backside. You're trying to quickly identify the person who created an IMD or something like that, and those ID, and that was actually that really struck as of importance. It's not quite a sexy story, but it was just being there and interacting with the teams that were responsible for making those split-second decisions based on the software that we were building was pretty interesting. Yeah, I try to think about some of the other things that have been. I don't know. There's something I could share from a biometric perspective. We did one. It was funny. I had a boss, and this is just a funny story. I had a boss back in the 2000s, and we were looking at how we could bring face recognition as a SaaS platform, and so there was a lot of interest in we had talked to a dating customer who said, look, what we really want to do is say, all right, we want this person to look like, I'm somebody who's looking for a dating profile, and I want them to look like Brad Pitt, right? So that's what we want to give you a picture of Brad Pitt, and we want you to search our dating profiles and come back with everybody that looks like Brad Pitt, right? And then we're going to serve those up to whoever's trying to look into that. And so, of course, we were collecting all of our data and putting together test databases with our own photos and things like that. And so we started searching with Brad Pitt, and our boss got hit. And then, of course, we never heard the end of it, right? So he always looked like Brad Pitt, so he kept a picture of Brad Pitt up. So yeah, it was kind of funny. It's always cute to see when you're like, oh yeah, you look nothing like Brad Pitt. Trust me on this. But it didn't.
Maybe the very first attempt at catfishing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's been an interesting career. Lots of different things that I've encountered over the years. Whether it's customer use cases like early fingerprint implementation that we targeted doctors. We tried to get doctors to use it as a way to log on, but at that time it just wasn't fast enough. Passwords were much faster. So that kind of fell by the wayside. This was back in like 2000, 2001. I know another one. This was actually happened to me. We were doing testing of our forensic platform, and of course, I ordered a fingerprint dusting kit, and dusting my own fingerprints in the office, pulling my thumbprint off of it, and then seeing if I could match against my 10 prints in the system. And it was fun. It was cool to do that. My son thought it was great. He got to see, thought I was like a CSI guy, but I was very clumsy at it. But the worst part about it was that system got boxed up and shipped over to a customer in Indonesia. And I went over to do training, and I opened it up, and I was like, oh my gosh, my fingerprints are here. Who sent this over? And I'm always fearful if I ever go to Bali on vacation, I'm going to walk through and be like, and the police can be like, wait a minute, we have your fingerprints on file. It happens to be in this unsolved crime database that was just simply
you'd be like hitting the go directly to jail spot.
Exactly. So if anybody's in Bali and they're listening and they work for the government, please delete my fingerprints. Right. That's.
Stick to vacations in Hawaii, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Awesome. I could talk to you for hours, so I think we've had some great conversations there. So what I'd like to do now is just sort of summarize if anyone listening wants to look at your solution, maybe to implement it perhaps. The way to get in touch with you guys through the web is prove.com. On
That's
Twitter,
right.
You guys are at Prove Identity. And I wanted to ask you if you do demos or webinars, or if you've got any events coming up, if you wanted to share anything like that.
So yes, so prove.com is correct. Certainly you can reach out to me. It's at tim.brown@prove.com. We actually have a wonderful customer event that's coming up in April at the end of the month. So if we have anybody stateside that'd like to join us in Charlotte, you can reach out to me about that as well. And we also have a number of events going on throughout the year. We just had a great happy hour event in DC. We have plenty of these things going on. I encourage you not just to go out and look at our website, but also to connect with us on LinkedIn. Our marketing team does a great job of pushing all those events out and making sure that people are aware of what's going on. And so we always love to see new faces, and I think you'll find a very exciting crowd to talk to from new technology. We'd love to talk about what we can do with our products.
Imagine your events are full of people with hoodies. Is that right?
No, not exactly.
Anyone
I mean, I
hacking
know.
space.
We actually have like our customer event is going to be a lot of banks. I don't know the dress code at all the banks anymore, but not so much hoodies. But no, we get some interesting conversations. Me personally, the events that I go to probably more so get more into the weeds. But for a lot of the events that our buyers that show up to the events, it's a great crowd. A lot of interesting faces and a lot of interesting people that we interact with.
Great stuff. Well, I'll share all the links in the show notes. And we will move to the final question, a light one, before we end. I always like to know what people are reading or listening to or watching that they're enjoying. I literally the other day watched the BlackBerry movie. So if any of you have watched the Steve Jobs movies, they were great. But the BlackBerry one was absolutely hilarious. I just did not realize what a character the ex-CEO of BlackBerry was. So I'd recommend that.
Yeah, I agree. I watched the BlackBerry movie on an airplane a few months ago, and it was fantastic. Wow, that's so not at all topical to this conversation, but I am absolutely loving Shogun. It is having grown up in the 70s, I remember the original teleseries. And yeah, this Shogun's doing a great job with it. It's fantastic. We've also just started Three Body Problem, so it's as a sci-fi fan, also great. So there's a couple things that I'm getting into from a movie TV show's perspective.
Great stuff. Well, thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate your time. That was a very fun conversation, and would love to maybe carry it on one day again, either face to face or in another episode.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much. I wish you all the best in future, and all the best.
Great. I appreciate it.